YouTube, this is Geographic Scholar. Today's video is going to be a review of an article that I read in The Atlantic Cities. Basically, this is online publication, talks about many different topics like the economy, jobs, commuting, a lot of stuff like that. And it was this particular article that I wanted to do a video on. It is about how cities are like nothing in nature. It was written by Emily Badger, who was a columnist for The Atlantic Cities. Now, as you can see, this video is being filmed in the woods. This part anyway. This part's being filmed here, and you will figure out why this is. I'm back. I was just out in the woods. I started filming out there because I wanted to give a bit of contrast between being out in nature and being in civilization. Now, this is going to tie into the article that I read, that cities are they operate like nothing in nature. The article was written by staff writer of The Atlantic Cities, Emily Badger. In fact, this video is sort of my inspiration for it was the article that she wrote. And she cited some data from Luis Betancourt, who was a physicist for the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And basically the findings of Betancourt is that cities are agglomerations of networks of people, not just agglomerations of people. You know, human beings settling in dense areas, having social interactions and connections with one another, and forming these connections. And what he was saying is that the need to connect with other people to get things done spawned other things like the building of infrastructure such as roads. He said cities basically work like that. And I read this article and I sort of like what was said in the article. It gives a really good point from a mathematical and a scientific perspective. I would also like to add my own perspective on it, how there's a big geographic factor. And my own geographic perspective on it is this. Another reason I would say cities are like nothing in nature is the fact that cities, and this is not to say anything bad about cities, this is just how it works. Cities tend to displace nature. They tend to work against nature in many ways because of what is required to build a city. You have to tear down those trees or bulldoze that hill or do this or that, or, well, not always bulldoze hills, but basically in order to build a city, one has to basically displace nature. I'm out here filming, and this is basically the subdivision in suburban Atlanta. One of many subdivisions you can find in the Atlanta metropolitan area. I'm filming here, and believe it or not, where I'm walking now, if you go back all the way back even to probably like 1990 or 1985, most likely this would have been woods, probably farmland or something like that. And today you got people living here. You know, try to imagine that for a moment. We still got some trees around here because a lot of the trees were kept, but a lot of trees were torn down. Now, as I've just shown how actually I'm out in the suburbs. I'm not in the city, but that was an example of how cities can work against nature, because in many cases, or basically every case, nature tends to be displaced when you build a city. You know, trees get torn down, hills sometimes get torn down, you have to build over certain things. It tends to work against nature. Now, a couple of other examples I want to point out, such as the city of New Orleans. As you can see from those pictures, that the first picture was basically the levee setup of New Orleans. The second picture, those are actually some marshland areas in Louisiana. New Orleans works extremely against nature, because now there are places where people live that are below sea level. However, with New Orleans, you have a situation where it literally sits like this. You have the city here, and you have to have a seawall to block out water from coming in. And it was built on soft, silty soil typical of marshlands. Very soft, not that stable. In many ways, it works against nature. You know, nature had to be displaced to build New Orleans there. And the city itself physically had to work against nature because of the fact to keep it from flooding, and in many cases it flooded anyway. An extreme case being in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. But I would say that is a geographic and environmental perspective of how cities can work like nothing in nature. Because you notice with a lot of things, like would say, you know, the lion or the vulture or other birds, you know, obviously, it's in nature, an animal has to kill to survive. But with human beings, it's different. We not only kill, we also tear down things, such as trees, marshlands, grasslands, certain areas. We sort of replace nature with a city. I would say that's how cities work like nothing else in nature, because it goes against nature. And that's not the only example. Another example that I could give, Amsterdam in the Netherlands, built, it needs a seawall to protect it from water coming in. And that's another example. And it's built on soft soil, so the buildings have to be built a special way. Everything has to make sure that the city doesn't go and sink. And that's another example. And there are other cases where you can find, literally a city working against nature. Like, you see it with St. Louis. St. Louis, it got flooded because normally this is how natural flood stages work. You get rain, the water has to go somewhere. So in a normal scenario in nature, you've got the floodplain there, and water expands, covers, it gets absorbed in the floodplain. With a city replacing that floodplain, water can't really be absorbed into the soil that easily. And so you have flooding. And that's just sort of another way how cities tend to work against nature. That is just sort of my input on how cities can work like nothing in nature. My opinion being sort of that, and this is just my theory, that cities have another way of working like nothing in nature by actually working against nature. This is Geographic Scholar, signing off.